We know there was a lot of news going down this week. We had the 7th Democratic debate and what ended in a contentious conversation caught on tape between progressives Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Ipsos told us their survey had Warren winning the debate, but Reuters found her sliding in the overall polling. Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani associate Lev Parnas, he called President Trump a liar in a round of news interviews. And in Congress, on the same day the House officially sent the articles of impeachment to the Senate, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley revealed an intimate secret and scored major points for courage and honesty. All that's real, but today we are going to focus on some things you might have missed. President Trump goes after Bernie Sanders over his vote on the North American trade deal. Deadly fires have been ravaging Australia for months now. We have the latest. And Virginia became the last state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, but it's a little more complicated than it seems. I'm Jamal Simmons. Here's why you should care. President Trump had a big week on trade. First, China agreed to buy hundreds of billions of dollars worth of U.S. products as part of a Phase 1 trade deal. And yesterday, the Senate passed a bill to implement President Trump's U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement, an update to the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Though it passed 89-10, there were a few notable Democrats and one Republican who did vote against approving the USMCA. Among those were presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, citing the lack of efforts to combat climate change in the agreement. Here to talk more about this week in trade is the Hill's finance reporter Sylvan Lane. So, all right, tell us about this big week in trade. What did the president get done?
So the president was able to clinch two deals he'd been seeking since the beginning of his administration. First off, he got a Phase 1 deal with China. It's a preliminary trade agreement that covers mainly how much agricultural goods and manufacturing products China will import from the U.S., but it also touches financial services access, forced technology transfers, intellectual property, a lot of areas that U.S. businesses had been concerned about for a while. And then earlier this week, he also got the USMCA, a North American trade deal, through the Senate. It passed the House resoundingly in December, the day after the House passed articles of impeachment against him, and the Senate cleared the deal just before beginning the process of starting Trump's impeachment trial.
All right, so let's start back with the China deal. The thing that's the most interesting part to me is this intellectual property stuff, because a lot of business owners have been complaining for a long time that you do business in China, it's a huge market, they demand you get a joint venture partner, that joint venture partner gets access to all of your intellectual property, and give it a year, give it 18 months, there's going to be a knockoff coming at you from the same place as the place where you're manufacturing. So people have been really worried about this. Is this deal going to help on that front?
So a lot of trade experts say yes, it's actually going to be helpful on that front, assuming China could actually go through and stick to the terms of the agreement. Now, China in the past has made similar commitments not to force U.S. firms to hand over patents or certain technology, and they haven't followed through. But this deal codifies the fact that they said that they're going to expand their oversight of IP laws, enforce those penalties, but a lot of experts say that China has subtle ways of getting around that. So it's really going to come down to how much they want to abide by this.
All right, and one of the other pieces here is agriculture, and is that where a bunch of these purchases that are going to be made? The president got a commitment from China to buy more American goods. Is that coming in the agriculture bucket?
Yeah, so the main, so we don't send a lot of products to China compared to what they send here, but most of what we send there is agricultural products, pork, soybeans, corn. So this deal, China has agreed to import drastically more of that, tens of billions of dollars more in agricultural products. The thing is, while these are big numbers that Trump could talk about on the campaign trail, there's some doubt about how realistically China could hit those targets. It's a pretty big increase, and a lot of folks say, who study this issue closely, that China is going to have to stop buying products from Europe and Canada to buy more goods from the U.S., which could create more trade tensions for Trump with some of our closer allies.
Oh yeah, because there are no problems between the U.S. and Europe these days on the trade front. So this is a big puzzle that they've got to figure out. All right, let's go to USMCA. One of the big criticisms of the NAFTA deal was the old Ross Perot giant sucking sound of jobs that are going to come out of the United States and go to Mexico. Is the USMCA, the update, going to help with the jobs front?
So a lot of folks say that, folks who've been, critical of the original NAFTA deal, who've, blamed it for a lot of outsourcing, folks like Sherrod Brown say, this isn't going to necessarily stop outsourcing. It's not going to bring back all of these jobs that left, but it's going to help protect some of the jobs that are there. And one of the things that folks who have been against previous trade agreements in the original NAFTA talk about is the fact that this deal establishes an interagency panel to make sure that Mexican factories are abiding by labor laws. That should theoretically make it easier for American firms to keep some jobs in America if the wage and labor conditions are slightly higher in Mexico.
Now, the deal says that it's going to focus on worker protection. That's one of the things that Democrats really push to get in there. And you have some surprising supporters of this thing, like the AFL-CIO came out in support.
Yeah, this deal is kind of interesting because it's completely scrambled and flipped the script on trade. You've got a Republican president teaming up with Democrats and labor unions to pass a trade deal. Now, the Republican senators, all but one of them supported this, but if it were up to them, this deal would be a little bit more, conservative, a little bit more oriented in removing trade barriers. What you have here are folks like Sherrod Brown, who opposed every trade deal he, voted on in Congress for 25 years. Yeah. Elizabeth Warren, who's running to defeat Trump. All of these folks who have been opposed to previous trade deals jumping on this because they say it makes NAFTA a little bit better and helps workers a little bit more.
All right, so let's just talk about the presidential politics impact here. Who voted for this deal who's also running for president?
So there are four Democratic senators running for president. Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, and Michael Bennet of Colorado all voted for this deal. The one senator who's running to unseat Trump who didn't is Bernie Sanders. He is another staunch critic of trade deals, but unlike Warren and Klobuchar, he says that the new NAFTA doesn't do enough to fix the problems of the old one. And he's also specifically cited the fact that the deal doesn't really, include any language targeting climate change or anything other than some modest environmental reforms.
And there's one Republican who voted against it.
Yes, Pat Toomey. He's a staunch conservative. He's been opposed to pretty much most things the president's wanted to do on trade. He says that, NAFTA, this new NAFTA updates the original one to include some technology issues, some measures that are good for Pennsylvania dairy farmers, but he thinks this is going to do more harm than good, and he's the sole Republican who voted against it.
All right, Sylvan, thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Blame it on the rain. The historic fires that scorched 38,000 square miles of land in Australia have been somewhat tamed by torrential downpours. What seemed like a never-ending hell turned to hope this week after severe thunderstorms accompanied by hail and heavy rains poured over several key regions where fires have been raging since July. The New South Wales Rural Fire Services tweeted on Friday, quote, "Our fingers are crossed that this continues over the coming days." The rains, which started earlier this week, could offer firefighters and rescuers relief, but there hasn't been enough precipitation to put out all the fires. 82 fires continue to burn. Forecasters are expecting the rain to continue through the weekend, and though everyone is pretty much jumping with joy, local authorities are worried about flash flooding in drought-stricken areas. Now, why should you care about what's going on in Australia? Well, the record-setting blazes in that country are said to have killed almost 1 billion animals, destroyed vegetation, and will possibly leave entire ecosystems damaged. 28 people have lost their lives, thousands of homes burned down, and some towns were completely engulfed by flames. Tens of thousands of people took to the streets in Australia last week, calling for the government to do more to fight climate change. This demonstration joined the hundreds we saw across the globe in 2019, mostly led by young people, urging world leaders to implement climate-friendly policies that are more aggressive. Out-of-control fires in California and the Amazon and Australia, record-breaking storms, battering coastlines, and Venice may soon be lost to floods. The climate crisis is spreading, and fighting it is getting harder and more expensive. Every year, people refuse to act. This week, the Virginia House delegates voted to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. The Commonwealth of Virginia became the last state needed to ratify the amendment that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. Wednesday was a momentous day in history, ending a nearly century-long fight for women's rights. But there's some legal red tape that might throw a wrench in the whole thing. There was a 1982 deadline for 3/4 of the 50 states to approve the ERA. That means the future of the amendment is not set in stone. According to the New York Times, legal experts say it could be tied up in courts for years. Here's why you should care. Normally, constitutional amendments don't have ratification deadlines. ERA backers are trying to dismiss the lapse deadline, but opponents say it holds. And one of those opponents is the Trump administration. The DOJ issued an opinion saying the ERA is no longer legally pending before the states due to the past due date. And the National Archives and Records Administration, they're the ones that oversee the ratification of constitutional amendments, they said it would abide by that deadline. Keep in mind, the deadline has been extended before. The original deadline was in 1978, and that got pushed back to 1982, so it can be extended again. Despite the obstacles, this passage is momentous, and equal rights activists prepare to fight on. According to The Hill, State Senator Jennifer Kiggins said, "Equality is a message I think we should leave to our daughters. I'm always ready to support an effort to allow every American to achieve their potential." Happy Martin Luther King Day. Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.